outlets.
Good dusk, good dawn. I like that since we did that last time.
I like that too. Yeah, I know. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Good dusk. I wish that would catch on.
I wish it would too, but I
That'd
don't
be
think
amazing.
it's going to.
I don't think it is either, but it would be really cool if it did.
Yeah.
So anyway, hello.
Hello.
We are Samantha the Writer and
J.A. George.
Here to talk to an amazing writer.
Yes.
We're really excited, as always.
Of course we're really excited.
We're always excited when people want to talk to us.
Yes. We like all of our guests.
We do.
We like all of them.
We do. So we are joined by Mark Dubovec this morning. Hi!
Yes. Hey, Mark.
Hi.
Here in the basement studio.
We're not actually joined by him here.
Well, it's true. I mean, he's on the phone.
He's telecommuting, I guess, if you want to call it that. But
that's the future.
Okay.
The future of work is
yes.
We are all just going to be speakers.
Okay, nice. I look forward to the day of our robot overlords and being a speaker. Those are the two things I look forward to.
Good. I'm glad because it's going to happen.
I'm aware.
And my brain just shut off. I was going somewhere, but then
we're talking to Mark. He's a great guy.
Oh, what I was going to say is, outlets, you might be somewhat familiar with Mark because he has participated in our New Year's resolutions, our writer resolutions, and our author thankfuls. So we are finally getting him on the show.
And he did write a story.
He did, yeah, and he wrote a story
on our Halloween episode.
On our Halloween episode. So you might be a little bit familiar with him already, but we are finally getting him on the podcast for a little bit of a longer conversation.
Yes.
So, yay!
So, welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be on.
Yeah,
absolutely.
For sure.
So, I kind of know the answer to this already, but for our listeners' benefit, what kind of writing do you do? What areas do you work in?
Well, there's two types of writing I had. There's my background is journalism. So I worked 5 years as a professional newspaper reporter, so that was where I made my money for a long time. Now I work for a library as a communications manager, but then there's the passion writing I do that I'm trying to make a living at, or would like to make a living at. And I write fiction, mostly of the horror science fiction, and sometimes a touch of fantasy, but I also dip my toes in just about any kind of writing I have an interest in. I've done screenplays. I've done a couple of plays, done some poetry, which will probably never see the light of day, but working on a few novels. I'm always working on short stories, so I guess just a little bit of everything, really. Just anything that catches my interest is a fascinating story.
Do you, since you're kind of dipping your toes in a lot of areas, which I think a lot of writers do, but is there one particular type of those that you enjoy more than the others, or, kind of what are the differences or the things that draw you to those different styles of writing?
Well, short stories, I like them as like meat and potatoes. Like, you just set up a little piece and here it is. No filler, no digressions. You just get to the point and move on. Mm-hmm. Novels, you have a time to build a whole new world. Even if it's not a fantasy story like Lord of the Rings, you still have to, consider everything in it that's happening, where the people live, what the history is. Right. So that's fun. The poetry, which, I would say it's like straight, again, like short stories, kind of straight to the point, but sometimes it's not even a story. It's just, in that case, it's just an emotion or something just very, even more basic than that. The screenplays, they come from, I'm a huge movie buff, so I've always liked that. And so that's the different forms, but in terms of why I'm drawn to horror and science fiction, it's actually a funny story, because when I was a kid, I used to hate horror. I was always terrified of that stuff. If my family put a zombie movie on, I'd run out of the room and hide somewhere. And gradually, I started to get a little more like, okay, I'm going to watch a little bit of this just to kind of overcome that and not be afraid anymore. I also have to owe the commercials for Resident Evil 2 from back in the heyday, which is fitting considering they just released a remake of that, but back when that was new in '98. I was always under specifically the reason I was afraid of horror was I remember I was very little when I watched Night of the Living Dead.
Oh,
and I'll get more into that later, or at least something of that. But basically, it was always okay. At least these zombies can be killed by hitting them in the brain. And then, not long later, I watched The Return of the Living Dead, which is a spin-off series. Which, if anyone's not familiar with that, it's more of a parody of Night of the Living Dead, but it's also, I think, kind of scary in its own right. And in that, the zombies cannot be killed. You can shoot them in the head, you can chop them to pieces, they're still coming after you, and they're smart. And they are just, so I was just really freaked out by that concept.
You should see Samantha's expression right now, by the way.
I don't like it when zombies don't die.
Yeah. And then also the whole, that movie also like covered the whole process of what happens to someone as they turn into a zombie. So there's really a lot to it. I freaked out like, oh no, zombies have evolved and they can't be killed. And it may have had something to do with the fact that after watching the movie, my family thought it'd be funny to pretend they were zombies. I ran outside, climbed the monkey bars of our swing set, and I stayed there for like 3 hours.
Wow.
So,
I don't mean to speak ill of your family, but they sound like they hated you.
Well, love hates. But gradually I started catching glimpses of different scenes of different movies on TV and like watching them and like, oh, that's kind of cool. Then I remember my brother brought home the first Resident Evil to play, and I remember being freaked out watching him try to play that. He never really liked the tank controls. And then the Resident Evil 2, seeing like, oh, they can be killed. That's nice. So it was just as someone put it, I Batmaned my fears.
Nice.
It was something I took that I was afraid of and made it my thing. It's actually funny if I don't write scary stuff or weird stuff. I actually do. I don't have bad dreams if I write that stuff.
Yes.
I saw this great interview with Clive Barker back in the day that he did with Wes Craven on Dr. Ruth's show, which is on YouTube. It's just a great interview with both guys. He said, there was the talk that they don't have nightmares because they give them to other people.
Nice.
Oh, wow. That's
nice.
So I do like that.
That's a pretty great quote.
And also, just going back to Night of the Living Dead, George Romero was one of the first writer-directors I was a huge fan of. I was saddened by his passing a couple of years ago because I kept waiting for more movies from him. But also, I grew up a bit on the Twilight Zone, got the love of that from my dad, and I always liked the idea of using the trappings of horror, science fiction, and fantasy to tell stories that are about something larger, socio-political or, metaphorical about something or another.
Right.
So I always like using that instead of doing a treatise, if that's the right word, or some, I do write essays, but on occasion I do, but I like those as like creative nonfiction. I don't want to like write a dry academic paper about the problems with America. I'd rather write it in a way where there's a monster and it's standing in for something.
Right.
Yeah,
and I've always liked the idea that the monsters are never the source of evil.
Right.
They are the threat. They are dangerous. They're awful. They need to be put down. But it's not really them that's at fault. There's something human that has pushed them, created them, that is the wellspring for all that comes from it, like Frankenstein's monster.
Right.
Yeah.
The monster is not really responsible in the way that Dr. Frankenstein is.
Yeah.
So I've always liked that.
Gotcha. So you've mentioned two things near and dear to my heart already. Movies and games.
Yes.
Yes.
I love every single movie that you mentioned there. I love every single game that you mentioned there. In fact, I played the Resident Evil remake just this morning before I came over here. So
I wish I could. I don't have a PlayStation 4.
Gotcha.
Oh, man.
It's they do a good job with the tension and the atmosphere. I have to give them credit. I don't love it as much as the original Resident Evil 2, but they did a good job with it. Anyway, that's a whole digression from the question I was actually about to ask.
Thanks for plugging Resident Evil 2 Remake.
You're welcome, Capcom. So,
you'll get that check in the mail soon.
Yes. I can't wait for those 3 pennies that they give me. So
I sense a new hashtag on some of our tweets.
I do as well. Hashtag Capcom royalties.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
where we go. But you mentioned movies and games.
Yes.
Do you find, I know you've kind of hinted at this already, but do you find that your interest in those areas has influenced your writing, and if so, how?
Oh, definitely, I would say so. Movies for sure. As I said, I have a blog which is mostly movie reviews, and I've recently started a feature there called Shot by Shot, where I analyze favorite scenes of mine from different movies, where I go shot by shot and I try to explain, what are the techniques the filmmakers are using to tell their story. So, it goes back to show don't tell. How are they visually making their point instead of just having, the characters stand still and say, this is the plot and here's what you need to know.
Right.
And what's the effect they're going for, how they achieve it. So there's always that element. Games, I definitely, Metal Gear Solid fan. I definitely love, the complex narrative there, at least when I'm not totally baffled by the weird stuff. Fun fact, if your listeners go to my Instagram page, they can see me cosplaying as Kaz Miller from Metal Gear Solid 5.
Nice.
So,
that's awesome.
That was fun. Games are definitely, I've played video games all my life. There was a point where I wasn't playing them as much as I was when I was little, but I've kind of gotten back into it recently. And there's always, obviously visually they're continuing to evolve. I don't really, not necessarily that they're more and more realistic, but you look at, like Legend of Zelda stuff, and it's just amazing. And there's definitely emotions they evoke that you try to, as a writer or filmmaker or whatever, you're trying to hit some ways. So the storytelling, how it's something like Metal Gear Solid, or even something like Life is Strange, which a friend of mine introduced me to last year. You look at what's the story, and how is their medium helping them to inform that.
Right.
Well, I think, and you were talking about, show, don't tell, which is, it's interesting to see it in movies and the breakdown that you do, on the blog and everything, but then bringing that back into your writing, because for me, as a writer, it's a lot easier for me to be like, and then my character did this.
Yeah.
It's like the easy road, and then you got to kind of go, oh, wait a second, no, this person is living it. Like, this person is alive. This is their life. Like, I can't just...
I'm going to add to that and connect it to what Mark was saying. One of the things, because I am a gamer, I've been playing games for decades now. One of the things that I try to do, one of the ways that games have influenced my writing is when I'm doing the editing, I go back and look at my scene and I think, okay, in a video game, as the player, you are living out this moment. Am I evoking the same feeling for my reader? Am I putting my reader in the scene where they are immersed the same way that I would be if I were playing this as a game? So I actually actively think about that from a gaming perspective. In a game, I would be immersed because am I doing something similar with the writing?
That's really cool.
It's a little thing that I do, but it's one of the things that I do. So
I know exactly what you mean. And I also, just in a more specific example, have you ever played Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem?
Oh, God, I love that game. Such an amazing game.
I love it, too. For the readers that don't know, it was a Nintendo GameCube game from, I think, 2002.
Yeah, something like that.
Inspired by the Cthulhu mythos of H.P. Lovecraft.
Yes.
It has these overlapping stories that take place across thousands of years with half a dozen different characters, and it's the way it all weaves together, and it's so there's definitely horrific stuff there, and there's some cool gameplay elements there that you're not going to get in another medium. But even if you're not a gamer, you can just look up a Let's Play on YouTube and just watch the story. And it's compelling in that regard. And I also like the way they, show different, like, a lot of games get accused of backtracking, which is you're going over the same area multiple times. Resident Evil has been accused of that, and it can be tedious. But in Eternal Darkness, when you're playing these little short chapters as different characters, you return to spots, but now they're like centuries apart. So you go to this French monastery at the height of Charlemagne, and then you come back later as a news correspondent during World War I, and how things have changed and how the plot has unfolded and affected everything. So I would definitely would love to write a book or some project that was just as ambitious and all like complex like that. But it's like, well, Lovecraft already wrote his stories, and I can't really think of anything I would. So that's kind of, I'd love to do something like that. I just don't have the right idea yet for it.
You've actually given me this conversation. I'd never thought about this, but something new to aspire to in my writing. I love the way that game messes with the player, and it uses the mechanics of video games. Like, there are moments where it feels like the game has completely glitched out on you, but that's part of the game.
Oh, wow.
So they are completely messing with you as a player, but they're using the conventions that you are used to from playing games.
Yes.
I want to figure out a way to do that with one of my stories now. So,
man.
Well, have you read House of Leaves by, what's his name? Mark Danielewski, I believe his name is.
I know of it, but I have not read it.
I think he does something like that, because he has his story, then he's got this ostensible editor who is, putting in footnotes and explaining things, but then the footnotes will go on for pages, and they have their own little story. So
it's a cool book. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did we learn on Shameless Plugs so far? Play video games. I think that's what we learned.
I think that's just a good life lesson, period.
Agreed,
but...
yeah. No, it's true, though. It's because video games are another type of storytelling. They're just, I think it gives, as the player, you are like a reader. You're going through the story, you're getting to know the characters, you're getting to know they become people, and you become invested in, because I game as well, not as much as these two, but, so, yeah, I think all of our outlets should go play a video game today.
Yeah, there you go.
Why not, right?
Yeah.
And, you talk about obstacles, what are a character's strengths, weaknesses. Sometimes some game it's just, this character has super strength and their weakness is this health bar. But even then, it gives you stuff you should think about as a writer. What is my character's strength? What is their weakness? What are the obstacles they're overcoming? You read some books and you ask the person to recount all that stuff. They might be, well, maybe this was an obstacle, maybe it wasn't. But if you ask them, what's Mario's strength and what are his obstacles, they can probably tell you in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just going to do I'm going to have a minor, this will be short, soapbox moment.
Go.
I think that the writing in games has gotten, not only has it gotten significantly better over the years, but I think that it is underrated. I will stand on the top of any mountain and proclaim that Knights of the Old Republic 2 is the best Star Wars story since the original trilogy. Nothing else, not the novels, not any of the other movies, compares to the story in Knights of the Old Republic 2. It is a treatise on faith and the loss of faith, and it is brilliant writing, and Chris Avellone is the best writer in video games, and I'm done.
That was a short one. That was good.
Told you it was going to be short.
Good. I like that.
Told you it was going to be short. Yeah, Mark Z. Danielewski. That's the author. I looked it up while we were talking.
Yeah, we just wanted to make sure we got it in there for you.
Yeah. So we've talked about, what has influenced your writing, but other than the blog that you mentioned earlier, what are you writing right now? What are you working on?
Well, presently the closest thing, and it's going to seem kind of weird, the closest thing to fruition is a children's book.
Nice.
I had written a short story about a skeleton, and it was maybe 2,000 words, if that. It's only like 4 pages of text, and compared to my other writing, it's kind of toned down. There's nothing really violent or scary or dark about it other than, the skeleton and other things happen. It's called. And I was, I didn't know what kind of market there was for that. I've sent my short stories out to other publications, but they specifically want more adult-oriented horror stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whereas this, I'm like, I don't know what this will work with. And then I thought, this actually could, if I tweak it a little bit, it could make a good children's story if I get the right illustrator. I've been talking with a friend, who I've actually done I've hired them out for other artwork before in the past, and their work is very good. So I thought maybe I could pair up with them and see where something's going. So that actually could be, my story part's all written. It's just, I think right now it's the business side of negotiating with my friends to see if they want to make that commitment. So, and I'm optimistic. I've got 2 drafts of novels that I'm currently revising. The one is called Scapegoat, and I call it my high school football story, but that does not really do it justice because the main character, the narrator, is a high school football player, but and he does play in a couple of games early on, but it's definitely weird in that he is good for I started off with the opening sentence. I started writing this out by hand in a notebook just to see where it goes because I had the idea for the character flashed in my head, and I had the first sentence of him narrating. And he's not very fast. He's not very skilled, but he's good at one thing. He's good at absorbing pain. And in this draft, I may change this, but in this draft, he does have this weird Wolverine-like healing ability.
Oh.
He gets bones broken. He gets cut up and everything, but, by the next day, he's right as rain.
Is he the best there is at what he does? Sorry.
Yeah, so his nickname is Goat. And he's just kind of this weird. He's not the star player. He is just the guy who absorbs punishment for the guys who are the stars.
Interesting.
And he meets the new girl at high school, and they don't have a romantic relationship, but they definitely have this weird friendship going on. They bond over music. She's kind of the weird teen rebel. She's into heavy metal. She's always dressed in black, and she's kind of got her own troubles that she kind of draws him into. It's also about, as we kind of explore the main character's background and stuff, it's just he carries with him a lot of guilt. And in some way, all this physical punishment that he just shrugs off is, in some ways, what he is that guilt he's trying to get rid of somehow. Stuff that he really shouldn't feel guilty about, but he does carry with him.
Right.
I don't want to say too much just because I am in the middle of revising it. At this point, everything I'm going to keep and everything I'm going to change, but that's
absolutely.
That's coming along.
Nice.
I did NaNoWriMo.
Oh, yeah?
Nice.
And I only finished that story mid-January. I did hit 50,000 words in November, but I didn't. The story wasn't done, so I had to keep working on it.
Right, yeah. Which is, the thing of NaNoWriMo. You get your 50,000 words, and then you go, yep, now I need to go back.
This story, I have a friend who I was talking with. He's an artist, and we were talking about doing a comic book together.
Oh, cool.
And we had a basic setup in mind. I had the first 2 issues, for lack of a better word, in mind, and then he had some issues he had to take care of. It kind of dropped off, but I said, you know what, I want to do NaNoWriMo, so I need to figure this story out, so I'll do this. So now I have a completed draft that needs to be revised. That's called Morning Star. and it's morning as in I am in mourning, not morning at the top of the day.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is it definitely reads in ways like a comic book in written form.
Oh, that's cool.
My friend and I still may turn into a comic book, but it's a very wild, outrageous, violent. I like to call it my dark Harry Potter.
Oh, wow.
In that there's magic, there's monsters, there's conspiracies. And there's also weird rock and roll song references that become the basis of chapters.
Nice.
For example, the opening chapter that introduces our main character is he's a mercenary, and he's leading his team of mercenaries through the jungles of Central Africa. He has been hired to track this arms dealer known only as Roland. That's all they have on him. They know his name is Roland. They find him, and they're like, okay, Roland, you're coming with us. And Roland says, that's what you think. And then Roland pulls his own head off and throws it at them.
Wow. Okay.
And then while they're like freaking out, Roland grabs a Thompson machine gun and starts fighting them off.
Okay.
And if any of you are Warren Zevon fans, you know that is a reference to Roland the Headless Thompson gun.
Nice.
Nice.
Well done. That's awesome.
So it was a go for broke story. I was just trying to come up with as many outrageous and weird things I could come up with while trying to have some baseline of a plot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The main character has a tattoo on his back that he finds out there's something not right about it, and that makes him the most wanted person in the world.
Wow. I would wear a shirt all the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I do wear a shirt all the time, but
I'm just saying, if that happened to me, I would just wear a shirt all the time. I'd just. You should give him a reason to not have to wear a shirt.
Isn't that what you're supposed to do as a writer? Create challenges for...
I'm just saying, maybe like all of the shirt factories burned down or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are no shirts left.
Creative ways for a shirt to catch fire or be ripped
yeah,
off
like
just
the whole,
constantly.
oh my gosh, it'd be so gimmicky and amazing.
Yes, it would.
Maybe we should call Matthew McConaughey for the film adaptation.
Yes. Wow. He's alright. Sorry.
Anyway.
Moving
Sorry,
on.
I was thinking of shirtless Matthew McConaughey. I got distracted.
Didn't we all?
Yeah.
I didn't. Oh,
Yeah,
I mean...
Samantha didn't. The one who probably should have did not. But anyway.
Nope.
So hopping between multiple projects like that, has that presented any challenges for you?
I wouldn't say not really. I would say, I think I just work. I think it's actually very liberating, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think, what? I'm in the middle of a story. I'm stuck on a chapter. I'm like, I'm stuck here. I don't know what I'm doing with this. Where is this going? I'm going to go work on this other thing. I will put my attention on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll come back to this with fresher eyes. I'll be refreshed. I think it's I think it's bad to get too focused on one thing at the expense of everything else. If you got to be passionate about what you're working on, but there are times, you're like, oh, this story, I don't know what I'm doing with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrible. I should put it in a drawer and not think about it for a while.
Yeah.
You got to give yourself a break on everything you're working on.
Right.
That doesn't mean stop working. That means find something else that you are enthusiastic about in that moment, and then work on that until you're bored with it, and then go back to the original thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's a great piece of advice. It's just, you have one thing and you're so into it, but that, if you're stuck or something, sometimes you just need to clean those cobwebs out.
Mm-hmm.
Brain cobwebs.
Yes. This is the second guest in a row who's had a very
This
similar
is,
sentiment.
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's we had another interview with BK Bass, and he was saying something very, very similar. And so I think it's something that our listeners can definitely take away if they're having trouble with one thing. It's okay to jump projects.
Yep.
It's okay to
Yeah.
try something different, and you never know when you're writing in a different world what you're going to think about for your other world, because sometimes your brain just needs that ability to work through things on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's why long drives are good too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Understood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm going to throw in a plug while we're at it.
Yeah,
if you
plug away.
haven't listened to the BK Bass episode, as soon as you finish this one, go back and listen.
Yeah, for sure. Finish this episode.
Yes.
And then go back and
Don't
listen
leave
to
Mark.
it.
Don't be a jerk to Mark.
Yeah, don't be a jerk. Come on.
Yeah.
Nice. Well,
Yeah, wait till you read my book, then post snarky comments.
Exactly. So, yeah. So read his work, and then you can be a jerk or whatever,
Yeah.
Why are you people telling everyone to be a jerk to the guy? Both of you. What is wrong with the two of you?
I was just following his lead.
By the way, this is the one out of every 1,000th conversation where I'm the nice guy. I'm not the jerk. So...
Well, for those of you that don't know, Samantha and I actually went to the same college.
We did, yes. I think we were in a bunch of writing classes together, so...
We were.
Yep, so Mark was part of the ego bash sessions that I always talk about, and it's a good time.
I just remember this, we had modern American literature together, and I remember the talk about Appointment in Sahara.
Yep, mm-hmm.
I remember that conversation where, well, I don't want to spoil that book for those who have not read it, though. What, it's got to be several decades old now.
Yeah.
In the 20s or 30s. But, oh, yeah, I remember that conversation. I remember you were arguing that you didn't feel the character's final fate was not earned.
It's true. I do feel that way. I still feel that way. Because...
This conversation is cracking me up for the record, but I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's that novel is very Gatsby-esque, and I'll get on my soapbox for a second here.
Sure.
I cannot stand The Great Gatsby.
I'm aware.
It is one of my least favorite novels. I just can't. Sorry, Gatsby fans. And that they're very similar. The characters in them are very similar. The stories are very similar, and I just feel like he needed to do a little bit more.
Yeah.
Do a little bit more in there. So, okay, I'm off my soapbox now.
Okay.
But anyway.
That was a quick soapbox, too.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's not very long.
No.
I feel very strongly about that.
I'm aware. You've told me your feelings on Gatsby before, so.
Yeah. I mean, that said, like, I still like Leonardo DiCaprio, so it's cool.
Mm.
I don't think we were talking about the movie there, but okay, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I don't. Moving on.
So, Leo, yes. McConaughey, no. That's
Yes,
what I've gathered from this conversation.
That is correct. Yeah, you have gathered correctly.
All right.
And that's all my movie knowledge. I'm done. I know nothing else about
I noticed
movies.
you were kind of quiet during the movie conversation.
It's
at the
okay.
beginning.
It's fine. I mean, I let people talk about the things they know.
Mm-hmm.
I just chill.
Mm-hmm. You realize Mark and I could have had like a 3-hour conversation about the movies there. So.
I'm well aware, and about the video games.
Yes.
And we didn't even open up the music conversation because the podcast would have been 6 hours long. So we're just gonna...
We didn't talk about Dino Crisis even,
No, you didn't talk about
We did
Dino.
before we went on the air, but not on the air.
Not on the air, yeah. So on that note...
Yes. Take it away.
We have come to our infamous...
Mm-hmm.
We've done this enough now.
Yeah.
3 questions.
Yes.
So we will start with the one that causes the most controversy on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, are you a plotter or a pantser?
Both.
Why will no one pick a side?
Yeah, nobody wants to pick a... Be like Twix, pick a side.
No, you're good. That's actually what we hear.
I've gone. It's not sometimes within the same project. I'll have a general framework in mind of where I want to go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then I do leave room to go off on. Well, I don't want to say tangents, but moments of inspiration to run with that.
Yes.
Other times I, for example, Morning Star. That was I had a setup in mind, and nothing else, and I started writing. No idea. So that was a totally pants by the seat of my pants story.
Nice.
And the best example I can think of is I started writing this chapter, And it was supposed to be I knew this chapter was going to set up one of the main antagonists, and I was having this character deliver a report to this antagonist, and it was just, here's the report, sir, please read it. And it was one of those days like, oh, I got to hit the word count today, and I have no idea where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just said, okay, this person delivering the report, what's their name? And I ended up, I think that day, going like 500 words above the limit, just going on that character's background, and they became a prominent main character in the story from that point up. So I also, I haven't started yet, but I also have another novel in the works, or at least when I say in the works, I mean I have it all plotted out chapter by chapter, and that's another that's a science fiction apocalypse story. No title yet, but that is going to be more plotted out. I do think it helps to have some idea of where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to short stories, I think those are usually totally, I think as I said before, it's totally like the concept will flash and I'll just put it down.
Yeah, right.
So I think I don't have to worry about like, oh, this is a 10-page story, what's happening on every page before I write. It's just write and it goes where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
My novels need some direction, even if it's just a skeleton.
Yeah.
I have to contradict myself a little bit here and give you a point in the Pantser column.
Okay.
To agree with what Mark just said, when I do short fiction, I have the basic idea and then I pants it.
Nice.
So I do pants my short fiction.
So I feel like this podcast is like 1.5 Pantser now.
No, it isn't. It's not.
I feel like we just crossed over.
No.
I feel like we did.
No, I think you need to shut your stupid mouth. But
1.25 Pantser?
No. I'll give you 1.01. That's all I'll give you.
I'm still winning.
Well, that's the great thing about short fiction is you don't need to worry about long-term payoffs. You don't have to worry about, this makes sense later when I cover this. It's just, it doesn't have to. You just put it down. It's one point. I remember, actually, I think, Samantha, I think you remember we were in that creative writing class with Okla Elliott, were we not?
Yeah, yep. Mm-hmm.
I think it was him who was our professor there. I think he was the one who talked about short stories versus novels, which is, I think he's the example he used. I don't remember if he came up with it or if he was citing someone, which was the novel is like a portrait of the world, and a short story is just one point on that portrait.
Yeah.
So the short story, you don't have to worry about rules or what did I establish 100 pages ago? What did I forget? What did I remember? You just put it down and move on.
Yep.
You know what I will say, though, in my experience, and I've never talked to another writer about this, so I don't know if this is common or weird or what, but a lot of times I'll write a short story, and I will fall in love with the character or that little snippet of a world, and then that'll become part of a bigger story, or like I've read some of these on the show before. I've written short stories for writing classes or just for the hell of it, and I've ended up deciding, okay, that's the next novel I'm going to write. I want to live in that world. I want to build out that world just because I got intrigued by something I did in one of the short stories that I pantsed.
I think you got your plotter license back because that's just a different way to plot. So you're welcome.
I actually, something very similar happened to me with the story I read on the Halloween podcast.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah?
In that was a short story. That story, as far as I'm concerned, could end there. And, I think, it makes its point. But I mentioned earlier having written plays. I wrote a short play that was a vampire piece. And it was about a mother and daughter where the mother suspects her daughter has been bitten and has now become a vampire herself. And that was its own self-contained story, and it was, written for the stage in mind. So, stuff that if it was a short story, I probably would have written things, but I had to be mindful of, okay, what can be done on stage?
Yeah.
How am I going to do this? if it's just a short story, I could say, and then she grew fangs and grew feral, but it's like, well, how is the actress going to do that? So,
Right.
But I thought, you know what? I never answered the question, who is the vampire that turned this girl?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, is there a way I could, I think I could down the road combine the two stories, somehow. I have an idea about that based on how the play ends and how this short story ends.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's cool.
The idea I'm thinking of is basically the short idea is basically like one of those revenge thrillers like Death Wish or John Wick, but instead of Charles Bronson or Keanu Reeves hunting down gangsters and muggers, it's this grieving mother hunting down this vampire that turned her daughter, and then when she finds the vampire, she's expecting, this smooth, suave, sophisticated Dracula, and finds this pathetic wretch.
Nice. That's
I like that.
a cool vibe to it. Yeah, absolutely. Nice.
All right, second question.
All right.
We get our best ideas at inconvenient times and places, in the shower, in the car. Where or when do you find you get your best story ideas?
Oh, usually when I'm half asleep and in no condition to write it down to remember.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then I wake up having forgotten what the idea was.
Worst feeling ever.
Happens to us too.
Oh, I knew it was brilliant, but
Yeah. So good last night.
Where do I get my ideas? Usually they stem from I see something, movie, or I read a book, and I forgot to mention I've been working on and off on a zombie novel for years, and that's about halfway done, and I've worked on it a little bit. I was working on the other stuff, but my own inspiration for that was I want to do my zombie story. But I don't want it to be just like everyone else's. I want to put my own spin on it. So for that, I set up a challenge of, okay, every zombie movie, every zombie story, almost everyone ends with the big horde of zombies attacking. What are we going to do about it?
Mm-hmm.
So I set up, like, how can I tell a story where that's not how it ends?
Yeah.
So basically, I guess you might say I'm a bit parasitic. I see something I like and think, I want to do my own variation of that. Or I'll be, I wrote a short story based on the noises I heard in my basement.
Nice.
It's a dark, creepy basement that has nasty bugs and low-hanging ceilings. I thought, what if something's hiding in there?
I could not write that story because I could never go in my basement.
Yeah. It's just, going back to my newspaper experience, I learned to keep my ear to the ground and my eyes open and just look for something that was interesting or out of place or a bit off. So it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but I get my ideas everywhere. Get my ideas from my dreams. It's just I pay attention and I try to write everything down and return to the stuff that fascinates me.
Well, I think you said something that's really important there. When you're working with well-known characters like zombies or vampires, you have to put your own spin on it. As a writer, you have to bring yourself into that story because then otherwise it's just another zombie book or just another vampire movie. And that is the thing that makes that so fascinating is the author perspective.
Yeah.
So
I remember I was acting in a play last August called Lost in Time for a theater called Mad Lab in Columbus. And the plot of that is the main character is 60-some years old, and he wakes up in his 23-year-old body back in 1973 or 74.
Wow.
And he has no idea why that happened or how it happened, but now he gets a chance to relive his life and try to fix what went wrong. But now he has all this knowledge. And you get this stuff that you're like, oh, he's gonna bet on this boxing match and win all this money and stuff like that. And I remember my castmates and I were talking about that. Like, he could have gone back and he could have written Harry Potter and made all this money. And I said, no, he couldn't have. And they were like, what do you mean? I said, well, even if he remembered every plot point and every character detail, unless he memorized how J.K. Rowling wrote that story and her exact words, he could write the book, but it was not going to be the same book.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That, completely
maybe he would have sold it and become rich like her too, but it wouldn't have been the same story.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely true.
100% agree.
So, our final question for you is, what would you like to plug? This is Shameless Plugs. You can plug anything. You know, you can, so just go for it. What would you like our listeners to know about?
All right, I'll plug my blog.
Yeah.
Dubo. I'll plug that. That's called Dubo's Den. You can find that at dubosden.blogspot.com. Find movie and TV reviews, shot-by-shot analyses, some book reviews, some music reviews, some essays, random thoughts, a few other things. Please check it out, people. When I started doing this 8 or 9 years ago, I'd get hundreds of page views. Now I get maybe 40, so I would like the readership there.
Wow.
I will also plug the work of my artist friend that I'm talking with about the children's book. Their name is Sunny, but you can find them on Twitter at SunflowerVDC, and they're on Instagram too. Check out their artwork; it's amazing.
Cool.
All right.
If you see it, you'll understand why I want to hire them to do my children's book.
Nice.
All right.
Especially because my children's book is about a skeleton, and they love drawing skulls. I thought.
Cool. We'll
It's
check it out for sure.
Yes, and we will have links to all of this on our site, of
Yeah,
course.
absolutely.
Yeah. You can check me out on Twitter at Dubo Duke is my handle. There's a story how I picked that. Well, it's not really a story. It's just that was my old AOL Instant Messenger
Nice.
name, and the Duke part came from the Duke of New York from Escape from New York.
Oh, nice. Nice. I almost went
there
to
was
just.
there was a
I
chuckle there.
I almost
There was
went down a
chuckle.
rabbit hole. I almost went down a rabbit hole, but no, I'm not going to do it.
Not gonna do it. All right.
Nope.
No rabbit holes.
The rabbit hole would be, what do you think of them remaking Escape from New York?
Oh, don't get me started.
And interview part 2, where J. George and Mark Dubovec discuss. Oh no, wait a minute.
Because then I'm going to have to talk about the shared world, Big Trouble in Little China story. I mean, you're going to get me on a whole John Carpenter thing, and it's just going to get ugly. So,
Like I said,
I could talk John Carpenter for hours.
yeah, same here. That's the that's why we just called it a rabbit hole. So,
Yeah.
If you want to hear the two of them talk about this, let us
I-
know on Twitter, and
I
maybe
think-
we'll set something up.
I
Maybe
think
we'll
this is
put
a whole
something
separate
together. I was
podcast,
just gonna,
is what
no,
I
that's what I
think.
was just gonna say. Maybe we'll put something together, and who knows what it'll turn into.
Yeah, how about this? We'll talk about the George Romero Resident Evil script that's out.
oh,
Holy moly! I think you guys did just
You
come
know,
up with your own podcast.
I think since you wanted to keep score about things earlier,
Oh no!
we've had a few more guests that are like me that are like you on the show now. So I think I'm clearly winning in that category.
Well, here's what I'm gonna say. Here's what I'm gonna say to that. I have a good team behind me. I don't need 7 or 8 people.
But I'm gonna say that even the people you knew and brought on the show are more like me. Just
This
saying.
is very true.
Just saying.
This is very true. So I think all that says is I know how to get good writers in one place. I think that's what it says.
Oh, you just called me a good writer.
I know
Thank
I did.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, we're gonna end this.
See,
on a
you two
compliment.
really do like each other.
We'll end it on a compliment.
All right,
I
thank
brought
you.
2 great writers together to discuss.
Well, thank
things.
you. I was about to
Thank
say
you.
something arrogant. I'm not going to do it.
Oh,
so
thanks.
I'm going to end it on not an insult. How about that?
Well, since we were trying to end it on a good note, I hope there's no
Yeah,
insults.
there you go.
Wow.
All right, on
Opposite
that
show.
note,
What?
on that note, thank you very
Actually,
much. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, there's one more thing I'd like to plug.
Yeah.
Oh,
go for
okay.
it.
Sorry.
I actually, when I first read the Halloween story for your podcast,
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
that was the first of 2 podcast recordings I did that day.
Are you serious?
wow.
Nice.
And they were both the first time I had ever appeared on any podcast.
Mhm.
So I'm going to plug the other podcast.
Yeah.
So if you want to hear me just Marianne's Macabre Review.
Okay.
It's a horror movie based podcast. You could find them on Facebook. Look them up. I appeared. We did a horror movie draft where we had different categories of horror movies, like found footage, slashers, foreign, and we went around and we drafted our best picks, and we had a vote on that. So if you want to hear me argue for, and see what I picked for best found footage, best foreign, best slasher, all that stuff, look that up.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. I have to go listen to this.
So, and I am still kicking myself because I won't tell you what I picked for fantasy horror, but after the podcast was done recording, I'm like, oh my God, how did I forget Jacob Slatter?
Oh no.
Because I would have picked that, but I did like the movie I did pick. Well, I'll plug that too, Angel Heart, if anyone's ever seen that. That's an Alan Parker movie starring Mickey Rourke and Robert De Niro.
That's a dark
It starts
movie.
off, and I do like multi-genre stuff. It starts off like a 1950s private eye film noir and gradually becomes this supernatural horror thriller involving a voodoo cult and devil worship.
Wow.
That was a really controversial movie when it came out, too.
Was it really?
Oh, yeah.
It's very controversial.
Bill Cosby fired Lisa Bonet off The Cosby Show because of some racy scenes she did. So.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know.
It was, anyway.
Yeah. Huh.
But yeah, if you like film noir, if you like supernatural horror movies, I would recommend it.
Nice. Well, we will have all of this on our website. So check us out, shamelessplugspodcast.com, and please go check out Mark's blog, Dubo's Den, and follow him on Twitter at DuboDuke.
Yes.
So thank you so much for being on our show.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It was an honor.
Thank you for being on Team Jag. Just saying.
Just gonna leave that there. Like I said, bringing people together. It's what I do.
Yes. All right. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Thanks again to Mark. I really enjoyed this episode. And
I did, too.
I did as well.
Yeah. All right. We will see you next time, Outlets. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.